Okay, so we are going to get started now. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our Unity workshop again. And yeah, let's get started. So tonight we are going to go over several different things. We're going to learn about prefabs, and prefabs are prefabricated objects. They're like reusable things that you can use in your game. And then we're also going to learn to make our character jump. And yeah, so that's pretty much what we're going to be covering tonight. Is everybody ready to go? Does everybody have a? If you're following along, do you have a project up and running? Good, good, good. Okay, great. So we'll get right into it then. So here is where we left off during the last workshop. We have our character here, and if we hit play, then we can move around and still can't jump and fall off the ledge. And when you do, sorry, one moment. That is because our boundary is untagged. Anyways, if you followed along on the last workshop, that's how it would have been. The boundary is tagged to kill, and then when you fall off, go back up here again. So the first thing we're going to do is this this whole level here. This is really boring. All we're doing is walking around. There's not really much to it. And so let's make the level a little bit more interesting. Let's give our character some stuff to jump on, or obstacles to avoid, or things to collect. And so that's where we're going to get into prefabs. So we could just create a whole bunch of these platforms and just like build them up and put them all over the place. But that would take forever, because for each one we would have to add in the rigid body, or I mean the collider, and we'd need to edit to make sure it fit all the specifications and all that, and that's way too much. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go down here into the assets folder, and we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this prefabs. And so, like I said, prefabs are prefabricated objects, and so they're objects that keep all of the same properties and can be used over and over again. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our platform here into a prefab. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to change it so that it's generic. And so we have a starting point every time we make one of these objects. So we're just going to make it a 1x1 cube. I did that by changing the X scaling to 1, and the other two scalings were already 1. So now we have this 1x1 cube, but it retains the 2D box collider, and that's the important part about it. So from there, we're just going to pull it from the hierarchy here. We're going to pull the stage into our prefabs folder. And now what we've created is a prefab. And we can make an infinite number of these, as many as we want, and with every one that we make, it retains all of the same properties as our original one. So let's build up the stage a little bit. How I turned an object into a prefab, I dragged it from the hierarchy here into our prefab folder. So that basically says, however the object is as it is in the game right now, take a copy of it and put it in this folder. And then to put a bunch of them on the screen, I just dragged them out of the prefab folder and put them directly into the game. So what we're going to do is we are going to make this, we're going to make our level a little bit. So I'm going to change the scaling of this a little bit. I'm actually going to use this hand tool up here, because this is not the one that I was looking for. Basically, I'm just going to change the scaling like this. I'm going to move it around. That see. Good. Okay, so then let's work on the other ones as well. Let's go ahead and make a little incline for our character. Go back to the scale tool, and we'll have him see if he can jump this high whenever we do add jumps to him. So we'll add in a little incline like that, and then we'll go into the next one, and we'll make this one a little bit. This is what I was looking for. Now I'm going to use the rect tool, and that basically just allows you to change things at will, like this. That's the one I was looking for, but I couldn't find it. Anyways, we are going to make another one and put it here. So we have sort of like a stair-stepping thing going on. And then we'll make another one, and we'll make this one real big. Let's make these a little bit smaller so that when he's jumping on them, they'll still be on screen. Because you see this box around it, that's the screen size. So we'll put this here. We'll make this one a little shorter than that one. Okay, so now we have little platforms that we can jump on, but that's it's too easy, you know. There's no risk of this. If you fall into one of these pits, you can just jump right out. So let's make an obstacle. So if you remember correctly, if you remember to the last lesson, we made this boundary down here, and this is just an empty object, and whenever you go into it, you just teleport back to the beginning of the level. You die. So let's make the boundary into a prefab, because we want to make obstacles that when the character touches them, he dies. So how do we do that? We'll just make it exactly the same as the boundary. So what I'm actually going to do is, in the hierarchy, we're going to create a new sprite. So it's going to be a 2D object, and it's going to be a am I? Whoops, I was in 3D there. But this still doesn't have what I'm looking for. Okay, so sorry about that. So we're going to go into the sprites folder, and we're going to create a new triangle. So what we're going for right now is we want to make a spike. You know, that's a typical obstacle in a platformer like this, and so we'll go ahead and make a triangle here. So we'll drag our triangle onto the stage, but at the moment this triangle doesn't do anything. It's literally just a triangle. So let's change it to a different color. I did that by clicking the color thing here, and we'll change it to like gray. So it's, you know, made of metal. So now it's gray. And how did we make the boundary so that it kills the player? Well, we did that with a tag. And if you remember correctly, we made this tag last class, and basically in our code, in our player controller, under scripts, if we go into our player controller, we see that whenever the player collides with an object that's tagged kill, that's when it happens. So in order to kill the player on touching the spike, all we have to do is give it the kill tag. So we will give it that tag. You can do that up here. Yes? I don't believe so. Oh, does it? Oh, okay. My apologies. So if the character touches it right now, we can't actually tell that that he's touching it because it doesn't have a collider on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a collider. So we'll go into add component, and we'll look for colliders. And there isn't a, we'll look for a collider 2D. So there isn't a collider that specifically does triangles, but that feature is encapsulated in the polygon collider. So we'll use a polygon collider 2D. So now you can see it highlighted the spike green, so that means we have a collider on top of the spike. So now, if we set it to, actually I don't believe it needs to be set to isTrigger, you just have to be able to collide with it. So, no, it needs to be isTrigger. So now if you give it the trigger, which is one of the options under the Polygon Collider 2D, you just check this box, and basically a trigger means that it does something when you collide with it. So if you hit isTrigger and then you touch it, it works. We have a spike that now kills the player whenever he touches it here. So now we have our spike. Let's rename that to spike so that we remember what it is. And now that's an object that we've changed in some way. We've added a component to it. We made it a trigger. So, and we probably want more than one spike in our level. So let's add that to our prefabs. So now you see we have a bunch of these stages, and they're just named like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And it's kind of hard to see what's going on in the hierarchy because there's just like clutter of all these different objects. So what we can do is we can group them together. So there isn't there's no such thing as like adding a folder to a hierarchy, but what you can do is you can create an empty object, and that will act as something that that groups things together. So what we'll do is if you press Control, you can highlight multiple objects at once. So we made this empty game object, and we're just going to drag all of the stages into that object. So now they're all children of that object. And if we rename this to platforms, now all of our platforms are all together. And that doesn't like effectively do anything in the game. It's just for our own sake, for like organization's sake. So we're going to do the same with obstacles. So again, the way you do that is you create an empty game object, and you name it whatever you want to call it, whatever you would call a folder of these things, and you can do. And so we're making it for spikes this time, so I'm going to call it obstacles, and we'll drag our spike right on in there. So now we have a spike. I like where that spike is. We put one here so that you can't just run right up to the wall. You got to jump over the spike. But let's add a few more spikes to make this a little bit more interesting. So we'll add another spike down here. We'll just fill this pit with spikes, as many as we can fit in here. They can overlap as well. We're just for like to make it look nice, I'm gonna try and keep them from overlapping. So now we got one here. We've got a spike pit here. And then I'm just going to add a few more to this pit here. Let's see, there, and then another one there. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Do you guys have the? Are you guys following along? Is there any questions so far? Okay, we're good. So great, we now have a bit more of an interesting stage. As you can see, the spike, it doesn't have any physics or anything. It just has a collider. So this one that I placed here is a little bit off the ground, but it still works. But we can't jump. There's no way to win this game. There's no way to get up to the top platform. So I'm gonna quickly move that spike down so that it's on the ground there. And then let's allow our character to jump. That's pretty standard for a platformer game, I'd imagine. The way that we're going to bless our character with the ability to jump is we're going to edit his controller. So we'll go into scripts and we'll go into the player controller. Yeah, I'll zoom in just a little bit. Where's the zoom in? Okay. Okay, so this is the script that we wrote last time. This is the one that allows the player to move left and right. For a bit of a recap, we have our rigid body 2D. This is the rigid body that is connected to the object that has this controller. So this script is connected to the player. Therefore, the rigid body that it finds is the same one that is the rigid body for the player. We have a serialized field for max speed. That is a serialized field, again, is a field that can be changed within the editor. We have our start method. This is stuff that happens before the first frame of the game starts. We have our fixed update, which is something that happens every fixed period of time. This is like, we use this instead of frames because, say your computer ran this game at 30 frames per second while you were developing it, so you make everything based on 30 frames. But then the next person comes along and they play your game at 60 frames per second. Then if we set everything to work on frames, then they would play the game twice as fast as you do. So we do fixed update. So we basically calculate how many frames go by in a certain period of time so that it runs the same on everybody's computer. So in there we have our ability to move, and then finally we have our on trigger enter 2D. So when the player triggers a collider, do this. Our platforms don't have any tag, so the platforms do actually trigger this method, but because the platforms don't have any tag, it doesn't do anything, because we only have it handling the kill tag, which is on our spike and our boundary. Yeah, the platforms aren't triggers, so they can't trigger the method. Okay, so let's get started on jumping. So we have our max speed here, but let's add in another serialized field. For everybody watching, if you're on the Discord, we have sent out the full code base. Alex, if you could post on the Discord the first image. If you're on the Discord, you can get the full code base there, but there's not too much code today. So let's add in another serialized field. So we have one for max movement speed, moving left and right. So it would make sense to also have one for how high the character is allowed to jump in a single jump. So we'll create another serialized field for that. And this one is also going to be a float. And we're going to call this one jump force. And just by default, we'll set it to 5. Again, with the serialized field, we can just change this in the editor later if we want to. So now we have the serialized field jump force, and we will add in the ability to jump. So we have fixed update here, but we don't really need to be as careful about the jump because it's like a single instant that you press a button. So we can just put that in regular update. So we're going to add in another method here. Then this method is one of the standard ones. If you just opened a brand new script, it would already have this method, but we removed it during the last workshop. So we're going to add in void update. So great, it figured out that what I was trying to do. Anyways, but that is it should not be private because we want package access on this, which is default. Let's see. So we only need it to be an update because you're not going to be like holding down the jump button for a period of time to keep going higher and higher. You just, when you press it, it happens. So we will add in a handler. Yes? So it's called a low. Okay, so basically the consensus is that we're putting it in update because fixed update gets called a lot more often than update, and we don't need this code to be run as often as something that we would put in fixed update. So that's why we're going to put it in update here. So let's add in a handler for hitting the jump button. So we'll do input dot get, get is capital G, get button, and the button we want to find is jump. So by default, jump will be mapped to your space bar. So we'll add in input.get button jump. So find the button that is mapped to jump, and then we will handle what happens when it sees that. So our character in the code is referred to as rigid body because that's how we control him. So as you see in the start method, we initialized rigid body to our character. So we'll say rigid body dot velocity equals new vector 2. So we are changing his velocity from what it was to something new. And a vector 2 is just like a unit of direction and magnitude. So what we want to change it to, and the vector 2, it takes two parameters, the x velocity, or the velocity in the x direction, and the velocity in the x direction, and then the velocity in the y direction. So we will make the velocity in the x direction the same as it was. We don't want to change his moving horizontally when he jumps. So rigid body dot velocity dot x. So the same velocity that it has right now. And then what we want to change the y velocity to is our serialized field jump force. So that is a float. So we're basically just replacing his velocity, the speed at which he's moving, with his current speed in the x direction, and then the speed that we want him to be going in the y direction. So we do that by saying jump force here, which is, again, the name of our serialized field. And that will do it. That, in fact, is all we need in order to get basic jumping working. So before you move on, make sure to do Control S or go up to File and save. Is everybody ready to move on? Okay. So now we have that. So if we go into our game and we hit play, we can now jump. But there's a bit of a problem with this, because if I hold down the button, I'm just gonna keep going off all the way until I let go of the button. It's impossible to lose here because falling towards the spikes and you just catch yourself. You can't realistically jump off of air, and you don't want to be jumping every second as you go. So we need to add in a way to check if the character is touching the ground, because when you jump, you're not jumping off of the air, you're pushing yourself off the ground to go up. So, as we can fall into the spikes here, those work because, they're prefabs of the spike that we made over here that we've already tested. So the question is, how do we keep the character from being able to jump like he's wearing a jetpack? And the answer is we do that by checking if the character is touching the ground before we let him jump. Or more specifically for this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the character isn't already moving up or downwards. So what this is going to take is a little bit more code added to our player controller. So again, what we want to do is we want to make it so that when you hold down the space button, it only jumps the one time. It doesn't let you jump as high as you want, because that doesn't make any sense unless the character suddenly sprouted wings. Are you guys ready to move on? We're good? Good? Okay. Okay, so here we are back in our player controller. This is the one that we just edited to allow him to jump. And what we need is a check to see if the character is already moving either up or down. So the way that we're going to do this, nice and simple, is we're going to create a Boolean, which is either true or false. So a bool, let's make that private. A private bool called is grounded. So, is the character grounded, true or false? So what we're gonna do is we need to know this information all the time. We need at any given time that the character is able to jump, we need to make sure that they're not already moving. So we're going to actually put that one in fixed update. So if you go down to your fixed update, Alex, could you post the second image? Great, thank you. If you go down to your fixed update, we're going to add an if statement to figure out whether the character is already in the air. So we'll do if rigid body, which is again what we refer to our character in the code, dot velocity dot y. We're only interested in whether or not he's moving up or down. So rigid body dot velocity y is equal to 0. So if at any time he is not moving, grounded is grounded becomes true. So he's not moving. He's he's not moving, so he's allowed to jump. But otherwise, if he is moving either up or down, then is grounded needs to be set to false. When is grounded is false, we do not want our character to be jumping, because that's the problem that's allowing him to fly as far as he wants, because he's just allowed to jump right in the air. So now we have this Boolean that says whether or not the character is moving up or down. And so the way that we enforce that is we say if input.get button is jump, if the player is pressing the spacebar and is grounded is equal to true, the character is allowed to jump. So if the player is pressing the button and the character is allowed to jump, then let him jump. Otherwise, don't. We don't even need to put in otherwise, because it just won't happen if that's not the case. So we'll go ahead and save this. Excuse me. Anyways, we'll go ahead and save this. And if we go back into our game here, can only jump the one time. Now, no matter how many times I press it during the air, or even if I hold it down, you can't keep like flying. Yes? Yes. But we shouldn't be able to stick to the platform, because in the last workshop, we were supposed to be putting this physics material on the stage. So what we're gonna do is, yeah, we're going to move this physics material into the prefabs folder, and then we'll go into our stage here. So do you guys have this physics material from the last workshop, or do you need to make a new one? Okay, so if you need to make the physics material, just go ahead and in your prefabs folder, right-click and do create, and then go down to physics material 2D, and then when you're editing the physics material, change both friction and bounciness to 0. That's what's allowing the character to stick to things, because there's some amount of friction that's allowing it to get stuck. So basically, this is a great way to show what prefabs can do. If we click on our prefab here in our prefabs folder for the stage, we can see down here in the box collider, it doesn't have a physics material. But if we move this physics material into the physics material field on our prefab, then that is going to edit every single one of the objects that is made out of this prefab. So the main stage, this block, and this block all now have this physics material, because we edited the prefab instead of editing each one individually. So now if you go here, you can't stick to the side of a block anymore. So as you can see, with our new code, we can jump, but we can't double jump, triple jump, quadruple jump, or however many jumps it took to get all the way off screen. We can only jump the one time before we come falling down again. But our jump is definitely not high enough to clear the gap that we've made here, at least not on my screen. You guys might have made yours a little shorter. So the way that we're going to edit that is, remember how we made jump force into a serialized field? Well, we'll just edit the jump force. We'll make him jump a little higher. So I'm going to change jump force to 8. This is on the player controller component on the player. So I'm going to change it to 8, and that should allow him to get a little bit more height. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, that's good enough. So now, whoop. And then we can jump to this one, and then to this one. And we made it all the way up. There's no problems anymore. However, there actually is one problem that I noticed there. In that when the character is tilted in any amount, our jumping code doesn't work anymore. So the way that we're going to go ahead and fix that is on the player, in the rigid body, on the rigid body under constraints. You'll have to click on constraints for them to show up here, or it might by default on your screen. It varies. And what you're going to do is you're going to hit freeze rotation Z, which basically makes it so that he can't tilt anymore. So if we go up here, standing over the edge doesn't cause it to tilt anymore. And that will take away any issues with our jumping script. We're going to, at the beginning of, well, actually, this is a great segue into why is our jumping script bad? Because there's a very clear reason, or there's a very good reason why one should not create a jumping script this way. This is just a very simple way to get it off the ground until we have a better solution, which will come during the next workshop because it's a pretty involved process. So what is the problem with our jumping script? Can anybody? Zach? Exactly. If the character is for whatever reason moving in the direction, even if he didn't jump, then our script is going to enforce the fact that he can't jump again. And then additionally, if you time it just right, and I'm probably never going to get it, it's really difficult, but when the character gets to the very apex of his jump, his Y velocity also turns to 0 for a split instance. So in very rare cases, you could actually get him to double jump by clicking the jump button at just the right time. So that's a problem, but that is a problem that we will deal with during the next workshop. Because again, it would probably raise the length of this workshop significantly if we dealt with that right now. Oh, I just noticed I didn't move my spikes into my obstacles object. So I'm going to go ahead and take each one of these spikes that we made and put them into obstacles. Okay, great. So that again, that didn't do anything. That's just for organization's sake, because we can just collapse obstacles and platforms, and then we don't have a million different objects that are all named basically the same thing. But there we go. So now let's talk a little bit more about how this jump works, because besides the checking for the ground, there are ways that this can be improved. When you hit the jump button, if you just tap it, he jumps all the way up as high as he possibly can jump. There's no like doing small jumps or anything. If you had an obstacle that made it so you needed to do a real small jump, like spikes above you that you needed to jump between, this would make it real difficult to do that, because every single time you press the button, he just jumps the exact same height. And then this also makes it feel kind of floaty, because when he falls at the same speed that he went up. And that's not quite how it works, because that's not factoring in gravity. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a script that makes the jumping feel a little bit more realistic. So we're going to go back to our assets folder and then into our scripts, and we're going to create a new script because this one doesn't really deal with the character, it deals with jumping in general. So we're going to create a C# script, and that script we're going to call jump helper, with J and H being capitalized because proper object-oriented notation for classes, because that will become the name of our class. So we will go into our jump helper, and right now we are shown the default script. Let's see. Right now we are shown the default script that you get when you just create a brand new script. And the methods that we have here are start and update. So first, let's create some serialized fields. Everybody loves serialized fields. They just make life a lot easier when you're working in Unity. So we're going to make 2 of them. That is a, let's do a square bracket, serialized field. And the first one is going to be a float, and it's going to be called fall multiplier. And by default, we're going to set this to 2.5. How fast should the character fall? And then the other one that we're going to do is going to be another serialized field. And it is also going to be a float. And this one is going to be jump modifier. So jump modifier is going to be like how high the character is able to jump given the amount of time you press the spacebar. So the highest jump he can do will be when you hold down the spacebar until he gets all the way up to the apex of his jump. But if you just tap it, it'll only go up just a little bit with a jump modifier. So we're going to make that 2. These are just like default values. You can put whatever you want into here because we're just placing these so that there is something to start with, and we can change it in the editor later to figure out what we want to do. And then we also need to deal with what character is going to be jumping. So we're going to add in a rigid body 2D specifically. And going with the same naming convention that we had in the player controller, we're going to call it rigid body, RGDB. So the reason why this is outside of the reason why this code is not in the player controller is so that we can reuse this. So every character that jumps can be given this script, and rigid body will refer to the character that the script is placed on. So we have our rigid body, but we need to initialize the rigid body because that's just an empty piece of data at the moment. So where we initialize things is the start method, which is called before the first frame of the game. So we'll say that our rigid body is equal to get component. So find the component that matches this, and then the component that we want in between the greater than and less than signs. I believe that refers to packaging, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But between greater than and less than signs, we're going to say that the type of object it's looking for, the type of component that it's looking for, is a rigid body 2D. And then this is a method, so we'll give it parameters, but it doesn't take any parameters, so we'll just leave it as is. Okay, so this section is going to be a little bit math heavy. if you, I should probably, this would be where it would be really great to have the projector going to project the code, but unfortunately we don't have that tonight. So I'm just going to go real slowly and explain this as I go. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some conditions to when the character jumps. So if rigid body dot velocity is less than 0. So sorry, dot velocity dot y. So on the y-axis is less than 0. So it's 0 when the character isn't moving, it's negative when the character is moving down, and it's positive when the character is moving up. So we're only interested in when the y velocity of the object is going downwards. So when this happens, what we want to do is we want to make it increase the gravity so that it falls faster, and that's going to be determined by our fall multiplier. So again, this is going to be a little bit dense, but we'll get through it. So rigid body dot velocity. So the velocity that the rigid body currently has plus equals, so is equal to rigid body velocity plus vector 2 dot up. So in the upwards direction. So when we do something like vector 2 dot up, we're basically just stating a direction, not a magnitude of how fast it should be going. And then we want to multiply that by physics 2D. So our 2D physics engine dot gravity dot y. So we want to multiply the direction in the y direction by the gravity in the y direction. So the effect of that is just saying we want the gravity in the direction, in the upwards direction. So we want gravity. Basically, it would be like saying a force pushing the character up. So physics 2D dot gravity dot y times our fall multiplier. We're going to put this in parentheses because we want to do another operation on our fall multiplier. So our fall multiplier minus 1. Brandon, could you explain why it's minus 1?
So, formula, basically multiplying the amount of gravity. Minus 1, and like you could just write 1 point. But if 1 accounts for the gravity that's already there by default.
Okay. So the minus 1 accounts for the gravity that is already present before we bring in the gravity from the 2D physics engine. So we're just getting rid of that by taking it out of our fall multiplier. So we'll do that. So our fall multiplier minus 1 times time dot delta time with the second t in delta time capitalized. And so this is so delta time is the amount of time since the last frame. This is so that it's frame independent. I believe that we could have done this by just putting this whole thing in fixed update instead, but again, fixed update gets called a lot more often than regular update, and we would have this code trying to run a lot more times. It's somewhat more efficient to put it in regular update. So now we have something extra that happens every time the character is falling. So then also we want to add in the ability for him to only be able to jump for as long as we're holding the jump button. So we don't want him to always go to his full jump height. We want it to be relative to how long you press the jump button. So we're going to add that next. So else if rigid body dot velocity dot y is greater than 0. So if the character is moving up, if the rigid body, the character, however you want to think about it, is moving upwards, and the player has stopped pressing the jump button, so is not input dot get button jump. So if you remember in our player controller, we figured out whether or not the character was jumping based on the output of input.getButton. So we're just doing that in reverse, where if the input.getButton is true, then this isn't going to evaluate correctly. This exclamation mark says that we only want this to evaluate when this is false. So when the player is not pressing the jump button. And this one is going to be much the same as the other one, but we're going to do it, we're going to use the jump multiplier instead. So we'll do rigid body dot velocity plus equals, so the same as the last one, vector 2 dot up times physics 2D dot gravity dot y. So up until this point, it's exactly the same as the previous one, but here's where it's going to be different. Instead of fall multiplier here, we're going to do jump multiplier. We're going to do jump modifier here, which, as you can see, that's what I called my my serialized field up here, so that's what we have to go with. If you called it something else, you can. It just has to match this serialized field here. And then from here on out, it's going to be exactly the same as the previous one. We're going to do jump modifier -1 to account for the gravity that's already there before we pull in the 2D physics engine, and then we are again going to multiply it by time dot delta time, so that it doesn't matter how many frames have passed. So I'm going to go ahead and just, since I know that this is kind of a dense thing, I'm going to go ahead and do one last overhead view of this. So basically, the first statement decides what to do if the character is falling. The second statement decides what to do if the character is still rising, but the player has stopped pressing the jump button. In the first one, we are basically just multiplying the speed at which the character falls, and then in the second one, we are multiplying the speed, or we are slowing the character down, pulling the character downwards as he goes up, dependent on how long you hold down the jump button. So effectively, that just makes this whole thing just makes the jumping feel a lot less floaty and more precise. So we now have this script. So if we go back to the editor here and we hit play, nothing's going to be different because this script jump helper only works on a single object. So what we need to do is we need to give this script to our player, because the player is the one that's going to be jumping in this instance. So I just dragged the script right on top of the player, and if you look at the components that the player has, jump helper is now one of them. We have our fall multiplier and our jump modifier here. So if we go back into play now, and you probably already saw it as the character fell really quickly when he came into the level. If I just quickly tap the space, almost nothing happens. If you hold it down, he jumps to his full height. But you can do it relative to how long you press the jump button. So now you can more accurately jump between the platforms. And as the character falls, he goes faster and faster because gravity is working on him. He's accelerating downwards as he falls, so it gets faster the farther he falls. And hit the spikes and you die. So there you go. We now have a little bit more of an interesting level. There's a little bit of risk. You can accidentally miss the jump and you can end up here. But we will go ahead and do one more thing for today. So we now have jumping. We now have a place that the character can get. But why take the risk if there isn't some amount of reward? So we're gonna take a page from Mario's book, and we're gonna add some coins into this level. So let's go ahead and start by going into our sprites folder, and let's make a 2D sprite of a circle. So create sprites circle. So now we have our circle here, and we will move it into the game world. And in our hierarchy here, I'm going to go ahead and rename it to coin, because that's what it's going to be. So we'll change the color so that it's a nice golden coin, just like in Mario. So now we have this golden coin, and we can situate it right over there. But if you go into play and you go to it, for one, you can't interact with it at all, and two, you can't collect it. And what's the point of coins if you can't collect them? So what we need a collider. We need to be able to tell when the character touches the coin. So we're gonna add a component to our coin that I'm in the coin. We're going to add a component, and the one we want is the Circle Collider 2D. So that's just going to create a hitbox around the coin that the player can collide with. So if you go right into that and you touch the coin, you can now touch it, but you can't collect it, you can't move through it. It's just sort of there. It might as well be another piece of the floor. I bet you could jump on top of it. Whatever. I'm not good at it, but you could probably do it. Yeah. Anyways, so the way we do that is we're going to set it to a trigger. So now it's not going to be solid. It's just going to be something that you can interact with. So it'll send a message to the code every time the player interacts with it, but we don't have any code saying what to do when he touches the coin. You know, it's just sort of there. Every time the character touches the coin, it's sending a message, but we're not receiving that message. We're not doing anything about it. So we're going to add a bit of code that tells the character what to do when he touches the coin. So we'll go back into our scripts, and we're going to go back into the player controller here. So if you think about it, we already have actually two things in our game that interact with the character when he collides with it. That being our boundary box that makes him that kills him when he falls out of the level, and the one on the spike that kills him when he touches the spike. So, what we're going to do is something just like that. We're going to add in something that handles what happens when the character touches the coin. So if you see here, we have this, the way we did it for the spike and for the collision box is we're doing compare tag, and we're looking for a tag called kill. Now, we don't have any, we haven't created a tag for the coin yet, but this isn't going to work unless we do create a tag. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go back into the editor here, and we're going to click on the coin. We want to select the coin, and then up here we have tag, and currently it doesn't have a tag. But we don't have a tag that specifies what to do when the character touches the coin. So we're going to add a tag. So if you hit add tag, and then you hit this little plus button here, we'll add a new tag, and we'll just call it coin. So this tag gets sent anytime the character touches a coin. So now we have this new tag. So we'll click on the character again, and up in tag, we'll add the coin tag. So now, when the character touches the coin, in the code, it sees that a coin tag is being sent, but we still haven't handled what to do when it finds that tag. We just know that it's sending that coin tag every time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our player controller script, into the on trigger enter 2D. So on entering a trigger, do this. So we're going to say that if collision dot game object dot compare tag, the same as we did for the kill tag, if that tag that gets sent is coin, then we're going to do something different. So we don't have anything in place to collect the coin, but we can definitely make it look like the character is collecting the coin. So behind the scenes, we're just going to destroy the coin. It's just going to pop out of existence anytime the player touches it. So the way we're going to do that, and later on we can add in something that counts how many coins the character has touched. But for right now, we're just going to do destroy. Destroy collision dot game object. So basically, destroy the game object that the character has collided with. So yeah, so anytime the character touches the coin, it's just going to get destroyed because that's the game object that the character collided with. And we know that that's the game object that the character collided with because it has the coin tag. So now we will save this, and we will go back into the editor. And if we hit play, then if we go up to our coin here, we touch it, bam, we've collected the coin. Great. And if you look here in our hierarchy, that coin is completely gone. That coin is completely gone. It's completely been removed from the world. So we are going to go ahead and create an empty object, and this is going to hold all of the coins that we put into the world. And you can call it coins, I'm gonna call it collectibles. So later on we can put other things into the game that the character can collect. So an empty object called collectibles, and I'm gonna put the coin into here. And then, so that we can have more than one coin without having to go in and add the collider and add the tag, we're just gonna put the coin right into our prefabs folder. So now we have the coin in our prefabs folder, and we can just drag as many coins as we want into the world. So now there's a coin on each platform and a third coin on the top platform. So now, again, since these are prefabs, they already have all of the same attributes as the main coin, the first coin that we created. So I'm going to put them into the collectibles object, and when we hit play, we can go through, and now the character has a solid objective in the game. You just got to collect all the coins without falling into the spikes. And there we go. So we don't have any way to win the level yet, but you can count yourself having won the level when you collect all the coins. So yeah, I think that's all that we're gonna do for this workshop. Like I said, during the next workshop, we're going to work on fixing the jump so that you can't jump at the apex of the jump, and you can have objects that move the character up that he can still jump off of. And then otherwise we're gonna probably work on I'm not sure. We'll let you know. Anyways, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for those watching on the stream, and have a good night.